Hello and welcome back to Down To The Tyre. Today we're joined by Jack Brewer, who races in the Mazda MX-5 Supercup. After starting karting at the age of 9 when his dad gifted him a go-kart, before straying away to swimming after a nasty crash, Jack returned to racing in 2015 to compete in the Mazda MX-5 Championship. After nearly clinching the championship in 2021, before switching to the Mazda MX-5 Supercup in 2022, this is the championship he's been in ever since. I caught up with him to find out all about his journey, his favourite tracks, his sponsors, and what's next for him on the horizon in 2025. I hope you enjoy the episode. So Jack, how did you get started in motorsport? Because I read that your dad bought you a go-kart when you were 9 years old. I assume that was what sparked your passion for it.
Yeah, so when he first bought me a go-kart and we sort of had it in the garage to start with, and we used to actually go up to there's a secondary school which was just down the road from our house, and they had like sort of a concrete tennis court, so they basically lined this and made a circuit out of tires, and just I used to just go around there, and there was a young lad there with a mini moto as well he was there pretty much every weekend, just going around having a play. We weren't competing or anything like that. It was just enjoying being in a cart and learning something, a bit of a lad and dad thing. And yeah, it was really good. I remember we took my neighbour up one day when it was chucking it down with rain, and he was in sort of his early 80s at that point. He was soaked to the skin, but I was having the best time. Yeah, I think my dad was hoping that I'd come in a little bit earlier than I did, but from there I just loved driving in the wet as well, which always helped. But yeah, I did that for a little bit. I ended up actually crashing it, and yeah, that kind of being 9 years old and rolling a cart was not ideal. So that kind of, and I was doing the karting alongside swimming, and sort of the swimming side just took over with all the training hours that we were doing, even at that age. So ended up not really getting back into cars again. I did a karting day when I was 14, and then from there it was into cars in 2015, really. So I think it was about just over 20 then. So yeah, I started quite late, really.
I was going to ask about that because I read that you were also really into swimming, and I knew about the crash as well. I was kind of going to ask, like, how did you end up back into motorsport? Like, what made you? I guess did you lose passion for swimming, or was it just you rediscovered motorsport?
It was a bit of both. So I swam till I was 20, but I actually started um, at Presswold Hall, just working on the Supercar Experience Day events, just literally strapping people into a radical for high-speed passenger rides. And from there, obviously, surrounded by people that are either racing or have raced, and the bug soon gets you. And it was one of them that I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to at some point, but never really understood how to do it and how to go about it. And um, I spent a lot of time. I was very lucky to spend a lot of time driving supercars and nice cars, and throughout the years, I started off at Presswold, and by the end of it, I was at Silverstone working, and I spent so much time in cars, whether it be drifting, doing single seater stuff. There, it was really good fun. But it got to a point where I needed to actually get myself behind the wheel properly and start racing. So that's I ended up entering the Blendini scholarship in 2015, and that's what really got me the bug for racing.
Was this around the same time? Because I know you studied motorsport engineering at uni. Was that around the same time that you were doing all of
Yes,
that?
yeah. So I graduated in 2017, started 2014, and yeah, 2015 I did the Blendini scholarship. Did my first race on Boxing Day, at the Plum Pudding at Mallory Park, which was pretty chaotic in 2015. But obviously doing motorsport engineering and all that side of things, and then actually having experience of racing myself always helped. Obviously, it wasn't the easiest in the world being at uni, but also having to get enough money to go racing. Unfortunately, I saved up a fair bit to try and get myself ready to do it. And yeah, it ended up being really helpful with my degree because obviously you surround yourself by people that are in motorsport anyway, so learn a lot from them as was going along, as well as learning a lot from my lecturers, and there were some great people at uni. It was really good.
When you signed up for that course, was your long-term goal to work in the engineering side, or was it just kind of like a, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but when I went to uni, I didn't think too much about what I was studying. I was just like, well, I'm going to uni, I'll just pick something. Was it more of just like I'll pick it because I like motorsport, it will be fun, or was it actually like a dream of yours to go into the engineering side?
So I always looked up to people like Rob Smedley, and sort of being a Ferrari fan as well. It sort of, I always looked towards sort of the Ferrari engineers and always dreamed of doing that side of things. And if I was pretty much knew I was never going to be an F1 driver, but to be involved in it was always something that I always looked at quite fondly and kind of thought about doing when I first started doing my motorsport degree. But I soon learned quite quickly that if you're working in motorsport, you don't often have time to do motorsport yourself.
Mm.
So that's why I ended up going down the automotive route, because I can work in the week, and then the weekends I can be involved in motorsport. And if I want to still work and do the odd bit here and there involving racing, then I can. But if not, then I've got something fairly solid in the week to keep myself ticking over anyway.
I know my previous guest, Tom Shaw, he works for his local council, which I thought was really intriguing alongside his racing. Because I think this is something I spoke to him about, that people just assume that if you're a driver, that's your job and that that's how you make your money. And, you know, any actual, like, you know, someone who's been a fan of motorsport or like, you know, has read into it will know that that is often not the case. And you know, drivers up to, even if you're like, you know, about to enter F1, if you're doing something like F2, you're still not making money from it, even when you're that close to being in F1. So how do you find kind of balancing doing a job alongside it? Is it something that you struggle with, or is it something that you kind of take into your stride?
It's not the easiest at times. You sort of, it almost feels like you got two full-time jobs, even though one of them is paying you, the other one is you're paying to do it. It's more of you can always say it's a hobby, but it's more of a lifestyle than a hobby. Obviously, I do with the car. My dad does pretty much most of the work on the car, so it's all sort of within the family. I then run with the team at the circuit, but in terms of the actual building of the car and prepping the car, my dad does the majority of it, and we sort of have to manage all that together. And it's just one of them that it does take up all your spare time, so it's pretty consuming. But and I'm sure he will definitely say the same. It's probably even more consuming for him, bless him. But I'm obviously very fortunate in that regard, because without him, I wouldn't be able to afford to do it. So it's just one of them really that it's difficult to manage, but we get through it. And with my sponsors as well, that helps massively. They organise a load of different stuff for me, so it's really helpful.
I want to talk about the period between 2015, which we've mentioned, and then 2021, because between that time you're in the Mazda MX-5 Championship. And I think it's safe to say, over time, both the car, as a result of your dad's hard work, and also your driving improved massively. 2021 coming close to the championship as well. Kind of, I know it's a 6-year period, so it spans quite a while, but Could you kind of summarize those years in that championship and kind of pick out a few highlights or memories you have, whether they're, results you're really proud of or just moments that stand out in your memory?
Yeah, so in 2016, I started hiring the car off of James Tucker, and I knew him already from working with him in the past, and I soon got to know his dad, Paul, who's one hell of a character, great guy, um, and his basically his school friend Clive, and they all sort of formed the Tucker Motorsport family. Um, and then I basically started racing with them. Did my first race at Snetterton. I remember there was a massive crash on the start, and my mum was not happy. But yeah, obviously, as that year progressed, we got better and better. Had a B race win in 2016, but that basically meant that I was, I think, 16th really overall. So I got a trophy for it, which says I won. So I'm taking it. But yeah, so that was obviously a good year. But the car, we bought the car at the end of the year, but it needed a lot of work doing to it. And we basically rebuilt the car completely in 2017. So it didn't race at all, and I didn't actually get back racing till the middle of the 2018 season. The car was a lot better then. And we just started to build on that and build on that. And I think the first real step forward we had was in 2019 at Anglesey. I got my first podium, and that was the first weekend that my EPTA project sponsor came to see me, Simone. He came to watch, and then I get my first podium. So I've tried to get him back to every single race weekend I've done since. But that was really nice. And then following on from that, the following weekend racing, we were at Snetterton, and my teammate Joe, he won all three races, and I was third and 2 seconds. So I almost led into turn one, but yeah, that was the start of something and building upon it. We then had a few issues with car and setup wise, couldn't really get it working. Then obviously COVID 2020 was, yeah, everything we got all ready to go. We'd sort of planned for the first race, which I think was going to be at Silverstone, to run with the old engine before putting the new engine in for the rest of 2020. And obviously that then didn't happen. So we just put the new engine straight in, and I think at that point the car was ready to go. So we all sort of sat around doing nothing. My dad decided to make a scale model of a Sherman tank in the shed, which he's still making now. It's absolutely massive. And yeah, we eventually got going 2020. I had a really good year. We had 4 rounds, 8 races, and I think it wasn't last week. No, it was the third weekend of the year at Silverstone. We're on the national circuit. I think I qualified like 5th or 6th, but got myself up to 3rd, and then I pulled a double overtake into Maggotts Beckett, took the lead. So, oh, that was wicked. And then the safety car boards and flags came out. I'd never done a safety car restart in my life. But obviously that went pretty well all the way until the second to last corner when Mr. Mike Comber robbed the win off me. But I'm really glad he did that, because if he hadn't, I wouldn't have had such a good year that I had the next year. So yeah, and then you get into 2021. I had Dino as my number 1 mechanic, and Clive and Paul were all there for the first race weekend at Croft. And I'd never been to Croft. We'd done the test a week before with a young lad called Scott McKenna. And he now runs MDD, his own race team, with his brother Ben. And he basically gave me a load of coaching around Croft, and sort of immediately we're looking at the times going, this is fast. And yeah, it got to that first race. Well, we qualified on pole, which I was very happy about. That was my first pole position, and then got to the first race, and I just got chased all the way by Michael Nibbs, all the way. And I remember the last lap, I'm driving around, I'm in the lead. I got a little bit of a gap by this point. I was forgetting what gear I should be in. I think I forgot what circuit I was at one point because the nerves of I was going to take my first win kind of thing. Just my head went completely to pot. I think it was like 2 seconds a lap slow on the last lap. And crossed the line. As I crossed the line, I remember seeing Dino and Clive. I mean, Clive's 6'4", I think. He's a tall chap, but I genuinely thought he was going to join me in the car. They're all over the moon, and yeah, that will always be sort of my favourite memory of racing in general, but especially that year. It was a good year. It was a good start to the year, and it got a bit tense towards the end, but it was a good year.
I want to talk more about kind of all the circuits you race at. Any of my listeners will know that since you're based so close to Donington and your title sponsor is based basically at Donington, at East Midlands Airport, which people who are not Midlands based will know is right next to Donington. But firstly, I want to talk about 2022 until now, because you took on a new challenge in 2022 with the Mazda MX-5 Supercup. For anyone who's unfamiliar with the two championships, can you just kind of explain how they differ and kind of what challenges you had to adapt to switching between the championships?
So the main difference, obviously, is the car goes from a Mark 1 MX-5 to a Mark 3. So you've got a little bit more power, but you've got more weight that goes with it as well. You then go from sort of a road tyre that's a shaved road tyre down to a semi-slick kind of race tyre, which is the same both wet and dry. So in the dry, obviously, you've got loads more grip than we did have in the Mark 1, but in the wet, you have a lot less. And obviously with the tyre being the way it was, you've got a lot more grip when it's warm, but when it's initially cold, they're not that great. Obviously then to start with power steering, learning how to drive with that, which then we discovered in 2023, it was actually better to remove the power steering. They've now since brought that back in, that we have to run it, because there were, quite rightly, there were people that weren't able to handle the weight of the steering wheel on the Mark III. So to make it even for everyone, they've brought it back in for next year. Yeah, there were a lot of different things, a few finer details with it where you've got to sort of just, you've almost got to smooth everything down a little bit in the Mark III. And as well, there are a few things I really like to do in the Mark 1 in terms of like trail braking and little finer details that you are sort of exaggerated massively in the Mark III, and they don't quite drive the same. Only subtle, but when the cars are as close to the eye on the Mark IIIs, you've got to be like on the money from the get-go. So we had a lot of problems with the car in 2022. I think we did an engine change after 3 rounds, and we literally limped it through them 3 rounds just because round 3 was the Silverstone GP circuit. So I was thinking, I might not get a chance to do this again, because it's very rare that you do. And it was one of them, it's like, right, let's get it to there, and then we'll take the engine out, and we had another one ready to go. So we bolted that in, and it got better from there, but still, we never really got on top of it. But yeah, 2022 was a big learning curve in the end. We ended up getting a podium at the last round of the year. And I think because of how stressful it had been, I think that podium probably meant just as much as the wins did in the Mark 1. I mean, me and Dino were properly welling up afterwards. It was really bad. I just had to sit in the car for a minute because I couldn't get out. But yeah, it was that was a good one. My mum was there for that one as well, which was quite nice. So yeah, that was 2022 was a difficult year. Spent a lot of time in 15th place, which is not, after going from winning going back down, it was difficult, but as a team, we sort of just stuck together, and by the end of the year, we were getting there really. Um, we were just a few little steps off, but I think in 2023, if we'd had a clean year, we would have got there.
The reason I wanted to ask you about that car before I asked my question about the circuits was because I was going to ask you like kind of what are your favorite circuits to drive, your least favorite, but then I was also curious, are there any circuits that you enjoyed driving in one car that you didn't enjoy so much as the other?
Uh, a circuit, one circuit that I tend to struggle with. I love driving it, but in terms of results, that it's never gone well. It's been Donington.
No, don't
Yeah,
say that.
I know. I know. I love Donington. Obviously, I've, I've spent most of my childhood going to watch races there, and we've got videos of my dad racing there back in the day, and we were watching them the other night actually. And yeah, I love the place, but I've never won there. I've had a pole there, but it just, for one reason or another, every weekend just seems to slightly go off the boil. But it it's still one of my favourite circuits to drive, and maybe next year will be a better year at Donington Park. I'm hoping so anyway. But in terms of circuits, I love driving. Croft, I'll always love. Um, yeah, just because of the memories I've got there. Anglesey is it's a shame it's so far away, because honestly the circuit is absolutely unreal. And the view, I still remember the first time I went there in 2016. James said to me on the sighting laps, don't get distracted by the view when you start dropping down the hill. And of course, the first thing I do is I'm driving down the hill and go, oh my God. Because it's a wonderful place when the sun's shining. When it's wet, it's not quite as fun. Um, but Anglesey's wicked. And I loved Rockingham until that closed. I loved Rockingham. It was a brilliant circuit. I know a lot of people don't, but it was always one of my favourites. In terms of circuits that are different from one car to the other, I feel like Snetterton's a little bit easier in a Mark III than a Mark One, just because of where you're changing gear. Really, it always felt a bit clumsy in a Mark One, but the Mark III feels really, really nice around there. Again, that's another circuit that I really, really enjoy. There aren't many that I don't. I struggle with brands. But yeah, I think 2023 has some part in that as well. But yeah, brand's always been a difficult one.
I want to talk about, I know we won't touch on Donington too much more because it's cursed, clearly. But we've got to talk about the sponsor that I mentioned that's based right near Donington, because not everyone has a sponsor that paints planes. So I've got to ask more about that. Tell me more about your current sponsors at the moment, including that.
So Airborne, it was one of them that was by chance, really. My dad does a lot of instructing on sort of track days and what have you, and he was doing his first day at Cadwell Park, and he thought he was going to spend all day in a caterum at Cadwell in the wet, thinking this could be a scary day. Cadwell's a brilliant circuit, but when he got there, he ended up being in an M3 with a guy called Steve Derbyshire, and Steve is the owner of Airborne Colours and Airborne Graphics and Signs. He basically bought the graphics company soon after we met him, and my dad basically just heard him talking about painting and what have you. And we'd been looking to paint the Mark One at the time, and he just went, "Don't suppose you could paint a Mazda, could you?" He went, yeah, sure, why not? And that's it. The rest is history. It kind of he did all the painting for 2020, and then they did the graphic side of it for 2021. Have done ever since. So they've done both the paint and the graphics ever since. And in 2023, they started sponsoring me financially as well. Because without it, I wouldn't I wouldn't be sat here now. I wouldn't be racing at all. It just wouldn't be happening. So it was a case of I went up to them and just said, look, I'm kind of going to have to stop. And he said, well, what can we do to keep you going? And we had a chat about it with Neil, his sort of finance manager, what have you, and they both have looked after me so well, and yeah, they do a really good job. They make every year I see the car and my jaw drops. I'm always specific about the colours, but then I'm just like, right, okay. The rest of it, fill your boots kind of thing, and do style it how you want to. Yeah, so they'll ship a Boeing 747 in the hangar, and then they'll push that out and put a yellow MX-5 in, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I'm very lucky, obviously, with Airborne, and then EPTA were my first sponsor. I met Simone actually through working at Jaguar Land Rover, and he's supported me since 2018. I remember actually when he came to watch me at Alton Park one year, he came midway through one of the races, and you come out of turn one, and then as you're going down the straight towards Cascade, you drop down the hill, and he was just like on the banking to the right hand side. And I remember mid race looking over and going, "Oh, there he is," and just waving to him like mid race. I hadn't seen him before that in the day, so I didn't know where he was going to stand. But yeah, just plucked him out of the crowd. But yeah, he's a top guy. He's done a lot for me and support me, and he tends to come along to at least one weekend a year. I try and get him along to a few more because he's fairly lucky for me. So and his son Alex comes along as well. It's nice to get them both out for the day, and yeah, we spend a lot of time chatting about racing and all sorts. And being Italian, we talk about Ferrari a lot, which has been painful for a few years, but it's getting better. So yeah, so that's always good. And then yeah, I've got Beaded Seat Company. They literally, without them, I probably would be in a wheelchair right now, to be honest. After my crash last year, Steve is again local lad. He actually knew my sister, and his son is friends with my nephew, and they end up, I think, at my nephew's like fourth birthday party together. That's how I met Steve. And then from there, he basically did me this seat mold, which, yeah, it properly saved my bacon. So I'm very, very grateful for him. And I've had loads of support. Meliard Motorsport, they got me to Snetterton one year, and they've supported me loads with building the Mark III. They got me seats, wheels, pushed the car. Loads of help they gave. Mazspec have helped me out with loads of different parts. Edson Graphics, he does all my graphic designs and logos, and he's probably doing a few bits for me now, if I'm perfectly honest. He's if I ever need a logo in a different format or what have you, then he'll always do that. But graphics is his main thing. And yeah, there's probably a few. Oh, and Clapham North and Downforce Radio, of course. George, after my crash last year, he rang me, I think, like a couple of days after the crash, and just said, if there's anything I can do to help get you back, then let me know. And he sponsored me basically the roll cage, because my roll cage was not in a good way after the crash. Yeah, he basically sponsored me a roll cage. So I was very lucky that through Downforce Radio in Clapham North, I got sponsored a new roll cage for 2024. So I've met a lot of people, made a lot of really good contacts, and yeah, it's without them, none of it would be. Well, I wouldn't be where I am today. So yeah.
I say this every episode I do with a driver, but for anyone who is listening to this who can sponsor, who is interested in sponsoring, Jack's everything like socials will be linked below, so they're there. Always say I hope it reaches the right people. People who are able to support, because as we've said many a time, without the sponsors it wouldn't be possible. So yeah, links are down there. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I want to tease next year because you've not announced anything yet. So if there's any information you can give us as a Down to the Tyre exclusive, or you can choose to be a bit mysterious about it if you don't want to give anything away.
Well, it'll pretty much give the game away, but keeping it down to the tire theme, I'll definitely be driving on Toyo tires next year, and it will be in the same Mark III MX-5 that I've been in this year. So it will be a different team, and yeah, we'll go and have a crack at trying to get some good results together. But fingers crossed, it'll all go well.
Amazing. If anyone wants to guess in the comments what Jack is referring to, his plans for next year, then please go ahead and get your predictions. Get your predictions in there. But that was pretty much all my questions. Could have probably done like a way longer episode than this, but I feel like as we've said, we're both talkers. We could have we could have talked for ages, but we'll have to do an updated version. Maybe after next season, see how you're getting on.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll have a good year with a new team, and we'll see how we get on.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for coming on Down to the Tyre. As I've
Thank
said,
you for having me.
socials all plugged in the description below, so make sure you go and check them out. And yeah, thanks again to Jack for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much.